Welcome to LogiQ-On Talking Tech, the show about the future of workplace technology. From retail to logistics to warehousing, we break down how innovations like RFID are transforming operations. I'm Simon Wile. Let's get started. This episode is brought to you by LogiQ-On Tech, your partner in smarter retail and workplace technology. Learn more at logiqon.com.au. You're listening to LogiQ-On Talking Tech. This conversation with Steve Schenk was such a rich and detailed look at RFID in retail and logistics that we've split it into two episodes. In part one, you'll hear the foundations of why RFID matters, the problems it solves, and how adoption is shaping up across Australia and overseas. And in part two, we'll explore what's next: overheads, smart fitting rooms, sustainability, and the future of retail technology. Let's get into part one. Today we're joined by Steve Schenk from Look Inventory Solutions. Steve and I have known each other a long time. We go back, I think, to 2018, working the Lululemon project together. And since then, Steve has started consulting in the RFID space and is considered somewhat of the guru of RFID in the retail space in Australia. So, Steve, thanks for being here.
Simon, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Fabulous. Steve, like I mentioned, we've known each other a while. Things have changed in the RFID space. What's your sort of state of the union, as it were, for RFID at the moment?
Yeah, adoption curve is really, really strong. There's more conversations around RFID happening currently than we've seen in the last 4 or 5 years. So outwardly, we can see lots of information around data, AI, productivity, better ways of working, trying to reduce cost impacts. And industries and business in general is really looking for the technology answer in how do we do business as usual better. And RFID is a foundational piece of how businesses make that transition. So again, conversations around RFID really strong, trajectory really, really strong.
Fantastic. So the future is bright.
Yeah, the future is bright. You know, we could go faster, but the future is definitely bright, yeah.
Fantastic. So the future is bright, but let's go back to the beginning. Steve, how did you get into RFID?
Yeah, well, I was a long-term rag trader. I was probably 25 years in the rag trade, working with international brands and offshore production and sourcing and trims and labeling. And when Walmart started on their RFID journey, wow, let's go back 2011, 2012.
Yep.
At that stage, when I was still in the rag trade, a common scenario would be you would have incoming goods from factories, maybe 6,000-7,000 pieces. And there was no way you could effectively count what the factories were sending you. And the more that Walmart started to share around their ability to audit in real time without line of sight their inbound goods and what was on shelf and then replen, that struck me as this light bulb moment where this has to be a fit for the apparel industry in particular, right? So there was no way you could count incoming goods. You would cut a check to the factory just on the assumption that they'd supplied what you had ordered. And then when you drill into it in a forensic way, you would find later that there would be sizes, colours, assortments, size runs that were really off, I suppose, away from what you had planned. So therefore, you never really had control of what you had actually in stock, which was a nightmare. So for me, RFID was this. The journey towards RFID started with this light bulb moment whereby this is the better way to do things. How do we start? Where do we start?
You're right. There's nothing like trying to sort through boxes and boxes of gear and just finding this takes hours. I don't have what I thought I said. They said they sent. The warehouse is not accurate. And then it all falls apart from there.
Yeah, you ship 15, 20 million pieces of product a year. And if you've got 2 or 3% variance, you'll never pick it up. But that's a massive impact in unit terms and saleability. What's the retail value of that product? Cost obviously is one impact, but where do we get the disconnected retail? The retail lost opportunity is enormous. And it's season on season, year on year. It's just an exponential problem.
It certainly, starting at the warehouse, I've heard a lot of warehouses say we have 99% accuracy, we don't need RFID. Their spot checks seem to think that they've got it all covered. What would you say to those claims?
Good luck. Look, if you've got 99% accuracy, you're probably doing something that no other business in the world can do. So write a book and publish it, because there is some sort of reward in that mindset. I think definitely the high functioning factories and distribution centers that we see, once the goods are on shelf, their pick is super accurate, right? But what we're looking to solve is the delta between what you actually ordered and what you received. So this is auditing before it gets onto the shelf. Your processes downstream from there turn into a bit of a guess, because you can never audit back to the single unit level. You're assuming that what you are receiving is correct. And again, we get this delta or this gap in the data whereby you're either going to be overproduced or underproduced. And invariably, what we're seeing is this scenario where it's overproduction. So we're talking about wasted capital that's never converted into cash. And moreover, it's raw materials and resources. And in more of this sustainability play, we're over-consuming, we're overproducing, because we just don't have the data about what is correct at item level.
Right. Makes sense. I mean, you can't count what you can't see. And if you just trust bad data, you make bad decisions.
Garbage in, garbage out, right?
100%. So RFID has been around for a while. You mentioned you've been looking at this for quite some time, but we're seeing a spike in interest now. What do you think is driving that?
Yeah, the reliance or the requirement for data. What's my inventory actually doing? Where is it? How much have I got? And how do I get it to my client or my customer? So all the inputs that we're seeing in terms of the cost of labour, buffers in e-commerce back end, that ability to sell to the last unit, businesses don't have that currently. And companies invest so much money in producing product that it's never in a position where it's never actually sold out. It's a system view of, I think it's sold out. So every company that we speak to, every company will run buffers in their e-commerce back end. That transaction is not allowed to occur because we don't think we have that product. If you take the RFID view of your inventory, you can get that look-through ability to see sell to last unit capability. So you'll know 100% that it's available down to the last unit. And if you think of it in terms of competition across the market, we have international brands, and we can name them. We work with Lulu. Then you've got Uniqlo, Fast Retailing, you've got Intertech, Zara, you've got H&M, Decathlon, and many others, that businesses that are non-RFID users are trying to compete against larger businesses, more efficient businesses, and businesses that don't break their customer promise. The replenishment on shelf is really immaculate, driven by data. So it's a bit of a double whammy. You need to be able to compete. Big companies you're competing against, and those companies are more efficient. So there has to be a change. There has to be an adoption of how are they doing it? What are their processes? How are they more efficient than we are? And how do we get up to that level? How do we adopt best practice?
Yeah, as you say, it just creates a widening delta of efficiency between those that have and those that don't, and it must be really hard to catch up without having the same technology.
Yeah, how do you change? How do you make the change? What is going to change my business? And the value companies put into their inventory. We can't exist in this scenario where it's a stack them high, sell them cheap, or stack them high, sell them expensive scenario. We need to be better around our data and around our inventory data so we can actually pivot to where demand signals are coming from, as companies were trying to do, say, during COVID. But where is the demand signal coming from, and how can I make sure that I sell everything that I have, or as much as I have, at first margin and make it available when it's hot? Really, seasonal wear might work on a sell period or a sell window of 6 weeks. You cannot have broken promises in that 6 weeks. You need to be pushing that product to shelf and replanning it in real time. And again, we haven't struck on this yet, but counting stock once a year is not going to give you a view of what is real-time replenishment. It is just not possible.
No, if you're counting once a year, but you have a 6-week inventory cycle for fast-moving or hot product, it might miss a cycle count entirely.
Well, yeah, it's not rocket science, is it? I mean, how are we going to accommodate? What's our data going to look like? You count it once a year, and in 6 weeks, there is a massive drift in what you thought you had to what you actually have. And we've got inaccuracies potentially from shippers direct to store or DC to store. And we've got the impact of loss, although it's just the smaller piece of the pie. But we have internal movement of stock. We have the internal issues that happen with business, and that leads to the reduced availability of product. And then we have the opportunist impact of product, and then we have paper adjustments or the mishandling of data in and around our inventory records. And this all leads to gaps between what is physically on floor and what is represented in a systemic view or an ERP view.
100%. All these little 1%ers add up to make a major variance, and it happens very quickly and snowballs.
You're a 10-year, 20-year, 30-year, 40-year business. You've never been able to catch this 0-day view of your inventory because you only look at it once a year. I think even from a person that's not a designer, but if I was close to something that I'd created, I'd want to make sure that I had the controls in place so that, business 101 is you make something, you sell it for enough profit to make another one. But increasingly what we're seeing is other revenues to market where companies can't clear their inventory for their frontline stores or their flagship stores. So they have to have other mechanisms where they try and clear it. So they might have clearance outlets or pop-up outlets. But this is not answering the real problem. The real problem is I don't have control of my inventory. So I don't actually know what I've got left to sell. I'm going to put it there for sale, but I don't actually know what the missed opportunity was. And ultimately, if your customers can't find it on floor when they're in your store, bricks and mortar store, or if your e-commerce is geared around, I'm not sure if I have it, so I can't transact, there are missed opportunities. It's missed revenue for businesses, and that's where we're seeing more and more companies turn to us and ask us to help us with our inventory, help us with our inventory data. Can we get that absolute visibility, that 99.998% accuracy in our inventory? Nothing's ever 100%, but if we can work on 98% as a benchmark and improve from there, it's a massive shift for companies who generally exist in a 65, 70, 80% accuracy view of their overall data position in their inventory.
Yeah, it's a massive split from going from 65 to 99 on the regular. I spoke to a retailer recently who said they were refunding $1 million a year in missed orders because they didn't have the stock, sold it, and then had to refund the customer. However, on the flip side, RFID implementation isn't free. It costs money. How do you go about convincing retailers to spend money to save money?
Yeah, it's a typical story that we're hearing. I mean, you think of $1 million in missed opportunity sales, or you think of the broken promise that is, I've bought it, but I can't give it to you because I actually don't have it, so I have to have a refund scenario. So the chargebacks blow out of control. And again, it's a broken customer promise. So if all this data promises the customer that there is going to be a kept promise, we can give you this thing because that's what you actually want from us. How do we talk about the investment in RFID terms? So the obvious input is, what do you currently spend taking your data on your inventory? You might be paying an external audit company. You might be having to hire additional devices. You might have labor inputs. You have big teams that you might have to repurpose from store and take them out of store and put them into a stock tag program or a stock tag team. So cost of the current way of doing business, how do we catch inventory is a big one. What is that lost opportunity in labor from the point of view you're taking store teams off front-facing customer and giving them task? So there's a lost opportunity, but there's also labor cost that goes into that. What's the lost opportunity around what your excluded view of your inventory is? What is not available for sale in terms of e-commerce back end? Chargebacks, what do they cost you a year? What does freight cost you a year in returns? So these are some of the bigger inputs. So we can generally work on, how many stores do you have? What's your labor hours per store? What's the current cost of labor? How many hours are you actually taking stock? Do you take it once a year? Do you do a rolling 6-monthly scenario? So when we build an ROI, typically on businesses of any size, and one of the misnomers around RFID is that it's a big company technology. It's not a big company technology. It's an any size company technology. So whether you're a 200 store, 1,000 store, 2-store, 40-store retailer, there is an ROI in RFID terms, in terms of cost savings. But when we look at the sales uplift, RFID Journal many, many years ago, and again, right at the start of this sort of Walmart journey, they came up with what is really a fantastic foundational calculator on what you can expect your increased sales or your sales uplift in and around having availability of stock on shelf to sell at full margin. And that benchmark is 4%. There is a really simple calculation around a 4% uplift you can expect just by having replenishment in real-time data front-facing the customer when that customer demand is high for that product. And in our experience, we've seen 4% achieved, 4% overachieved to 8%. We've seen 11% returns. So our return on investment usually sits at between 2 and 3 times within 24 months. And that is staged around, you may spend the first year, 8 months to a year, getting labels onto product. Whereas, how do I start? Well, you start with an enabler. What is my product? Where is my product manufactured? We need to get an enabler, an RFID sticker, swing tag, sew-in label, some sort of attribute that's RFID data enabled in production at point of manufacture. And then we can take all the workflow benefits downstream from there. But it starts with a label on a thing at point of manufacture. But typically, 4% is achievable for a business of any size in terms of sales uplift. And once we roll into the total ROI package, we're really looking at returns of 2x, 3x within 24 months. So, and for businesses of any size.
So the floor is 4%, but the sky's the limit.
Correct. How are you? High-functioning businesses, really high-service businesses, are seeing more than 4%. And it's that has to be interesting for CEOs, CFOs, ownership, board level to understand and try and investigate. Is that applicable for our business? Well, let us test the logic and see.
Steve, we mentioned a couple of overseas brands, H&M, Lululemon. They've all been using RFID for years. How are you finding the pace of adoption amongst Australian retailers in the backdrop of the big internationals?
Yeah, probably slow. Given that we have a high cost of labour, all the inputs that we see going into business as usual are increasing. But we talk about cost of living scenarios, and we're seeing, unfortunately, we're seeing businesses in administration and financial difficulty at record highs year on year, 23, 24, 25, and more than likely into 26. The view that I have of that is that businesses are struggling to be profitable. And how is that manifesting? Well, it's manifesting in how do they compete? Are they able to compete? And where is the customer going? Are they losing market share? And more than likely, it'll be to these big international brands that are coming into the marketplace that are high functioning around data. And it's as simple as data leading to availability, leading to better decision making. And across the world, when you dig into earnings reporting of all the companies that we've mentioned that are RFID users, and not just in apparel, but in other verticals as well, it will be typically there's a doubling down in technology. There is forward investment in technology, and we're not seeing that in the Australian market. I'm not convinced that the importance of inventory sits at the really bleeding, pointy end of decision making when it comes to how are we going to change this? What's our next investment piece? I think a lot of companies need to pivot around and look at what they do. They sell things, they have things, and they sell. And we're merchants. And what is my data? Is my data any good around this inventory that we have, that we invest a lot of time and resource in? And I think that's the first view that companies need to shift. They need to probably, that there was search engine optimization, there was lots of investment in e-commerce, and probably on the back of what happened around COVID, that the trajectory around what was happening in e-com was organically increasing because there was no other channel to market. But once bricks and mortar is open again, there's been no investment in the experiential piece around what the customer experiences when they're in store. How am I differentiating myself? And technology leads to data, leads to experience, can lead to interactive screens and smart fitting rooms and all these really sexy things that can differentiate you, can set you apart from your competition. So I think it's a bit of a rewiring, a bit of a shift in mindset back to, can we control the data that we see? Can we get absolute visibility of what we're doing with the product that we make? And can we get it to the customer in a really efficient way, when they want it, how they want it? So I think that view of that overseas view of the importance of inventory is second to none. It's just an investment in their inventory. How do we present, track, monitor, manage? You can't manage what you can't measure scenario, right? And and overseas companies have no issue in investing in technology at speed.
I've certainly had some conversations that are, well, we like RFID, but we're doing a new ERP, or we're doing a Shopify upgrade, or we're doing a new brand campaign, and it always just seems to be sitting on the to-do list. Is it just not sexy enough?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it comes down to team size and bandwidth. I'll invariably talk to companies that are $500 million, $1 billion company, and you would think that something as important as what is happening overseas with RFID and the companies on the high street in the UK or the US that are, it's almost ubiquitous that the experience is driven by RFID and item level data, that it doesn't translate into Australia. Overseas, the model is we've got lots of data analysts drilling into the data to drive better business insights. And unfortunately, in Australia, our team sizes just aren't that big. There doesn't seem to be not only the lack of investment in the technology, but the lack of resourcing around who's going to manage the project, how do we resource around the data, what's the data going to show us, and how are we going to drive those insights through the business, and who are the stakeholders that converse around that data. Great for us because our holistic view of any business is to run the project from end to end, because in terms of RFID, you don't know what you don't know. We've had companies run off and think, we've got this. Well, you've done the business case. This is fantastic. We've got this. But when you get into the nuts and bolts of change management, talking about the communication around the usability of applications, what's the environment around RFID, how does that impact on the data that we're seeing? Again, we can get into this situation quite quickly where you've made the investment in RFID, but because you're not taking the data correctly, you've again got garbage data going in. So again, the business can't make effective decisions. So having RFID is one piece, understanding the nuances of RFID at environment level, user level, management level, data level, and insight-driven level. These are all the inputs that you need to be able to manage. And again, I think we just don't run teams that can do multifaceted projects. They tend to be backed up behind each other in a linear fashion, where they should be across a waterfall and they should be going at speed. I mean, great quote from Steve Jobs was, if you innovate with something and it fails, that's okay. Just keep working on the other innovations. One innovation doesn't queue up behind another. You need to be on multiple planes of innovation across your business where it's important.
And on that innovation sort of train of thought, certainly during the pandemic, we saw a lot of innovation around click to boot, click and collect, click and turning stores into dark stores and operations there. Did you see much of a divide between the RFID haves and RFID haves nots during these times?
Yeah, I think the haves were really in control of where their inventory was and getting it to customers, and the have-nots were stripping stock out of stores and trying to consolidate back at DCs and drowning in all the stock that they'd taken back from their stores and trying to sift through what they actually had. They knew it was there somewhere, but they couldn't locate it. But if you're working in RFID terms, the hot cold feature, the Geiger feature can take you to that product. I could have counted my whole store, understood what was there, boxed it up, shipped it back to a DC, received it in with RFID, made sure that it was actually fully auditable down to the last unit. And then I'd be able to understand, how do I now get that to my customer, because I don't have a brick and mortar location anymore. So the hubs were really efficient, and there was no delta between their delivery windows. They were still able to do same day, next hour type deliveries, whereas other companies that were non-RFID users struggled in that regard. And again, you had to throw lots of labour at it, but that was really, really difficult. And I think next in the UK was a story where they basically had to shut their whole DC down, and because they were relying on people that were standing side by side. During COVID, that was not applicable. So basically had to redesign their whole pick through DC workflow by the impacts of things like COVID. That COVID shock.
Yeah, and it certainly was a shock. It changed a lot of things. I think pushed a lot in the direction of e-com for sure, and stretched a lot of companies to their limits, but really highlighted the difference between the haves and the have-nots in who's got tight control of their inventory there. Steve, you've been in this game a while now. You must have some success stories. Who do you want to boast about?
Lowe's Manhattan Group hold it up as a beacon, a lighthouse retailer that, from the point of view of how we view RFID adoption, went really by the numbers. We spent an extended period, probably 6 months, working with the leaders in the business, and Saran Ryan has done a lot of conversations around the business's journey and her team's journey around RFID. So we spent an extended period working through planning what the enabler was going to be, the print face of that label, getting it up into production, getting enough production so that there was timely interception of the goods being produced and the label going on the product, and then what would happen when that product reached landside in Australia. Once we worked through all the different phases of the project, 270 plus stores, which geographies were going to go first, which categories were going to go first, because there was a lot of categories within that business. So schoolwear is a really important input to that business, as is industrial wear. So they were the two categories that were tested around. Once the business case was compiled and everyone understood, from the CFO, Jim, to understand what we were going to achieve and what the benchmarks of what success looked like, the owner of the business, Linda Penn, really was all supportive. I mean, obviously, there was execution. We had to we planned it so that we weren't going to fail, and that's fail to plan to fail scenario. But we had it pretty much by the numbers, and with the I suppose with the support of ownership of that business, that's where everything mobilizes downstream. So it really went by the numbers from the point of view of, we planned correctly, we got fantastic team input, the support around the training of the change in technology, why the business was doing it, was second to none. And ultimately, I think Saran's on record as saying, category by category, they're in that 8% sales uplift piece. And there's multiple benefits that business is seeing that probably won't ever be broadcast. But recently there was a conversation around acquiring another business and being able to bolt it on so seamlessly, because they could onboard thousands of SKUs and tens of thousands of items by putting RFID enablers onto those items and bringing them into inventory visibility in real time quite quickly. Something that you couldn't have basically achieved with another technology. You certainly couldn't do it in a barcode state.
So it sounds like it's really a holistic project that needs to work from the top down and have complete buy-in from the business. What have you found in the past has been a blocker to a project, and how have you overcome it?
Yeah, certainly with ownership, when we talk to businesses about RFID adoption, we will clearly state that this has to be a C-level supported project. You need a sponsor that's either ownership, CEO, CFO level, because business just won't mobilise if it's not pushed down through the organisation. So, traditionally, you might have had a scenario where someone in the business thought it was RFID is a great idea, or they've got a passion for RFID. Trying to talk it up through the business to get sponsorship is near impossible. So, my point from our company's point of view, we talk into C-level. Sometimes the blockers are the legacy systems, we just don't have the alignment of all our business information platforms to run the insights that the data will give us. There's disparate systems that don't talk to each other. Someone in supply chain might be working off one spreadsheet, and someone in product design might be working off another spreadsheet. Store operations might be working off another platform, and they unfortunately won't talk to each other. So it's when you have this this uniform view of your business that you're in best shape to accept the data, because you go from a trickle to a fire hydrant worth of data. Now, you can do a lot or nothing with the data. You can utilize or drown, and we see a lot of companies that are fearful that they just don't have this alignment in their back end to be able to use the data. It's a valid position to take, and we'd always recommend that you're probably not ready for this journey if you don't have an ability to see the data with a single view or a single point of reference or a single source of truth.
Thanks for listening, and be sure to join us next time as we continue exploring the future of workplace technology.